So in this video, we're going to go over the effects of test anxiety on academic performance. There are some negative effects of test anxiety on these. Firstly, we're just going to define it. Now, it can be defined as stress and worry combined with a fear of failure on academic assessments. What we take this to mean is that there are negative emotions that have been found to be positively correlated to performing worse on exams. And then students who experience these emotions, again, have been found to perform worse on these exams, taking it to mean that test anxiety can impact academic achievement. Now, in theory, combating test anxiety with coping tools or mechanisms can positively impact academic achievement. Now, could test anxiety and disengaged emotional tools and coping mechanisms affect grades? Now, that would be test anxiety and poor coping mechanisms affecting grades. It has been found that test anxiety has negatively impacted academic achievement, and coping mechanisms combined with, disengaged coping mechanisms combined with emotional dysregulation have been found to be predictive of testing anxiety. Now, what this means is that if the emotional dysregulation and those disengaged coping mechanisms are improved, that testing anxiety could be improved as well as a result of that. Now, we're going to go over a few studies. The first one here is the effects of foreign language anxiety and testing anxiety on foreign language test performance. In this study, there were 200 students of English as a foreign language involved. They took their 2 questionnaires home, and they were set aside afterwards until final grades were available. Here, testing anxiety and foreign language test anxiety showed pretty strong correlations with low academic performance. That means students that exhibited these negative emotions also did worse on their grades. And the author at the end suggests that finding ways to reduce these type of anxieties might improve academic achievement. For the second study is Just Breathe, the effects of emotional dysregulation and test anxiety on GPA. For this one, there were 191 undergraduate college students presented. They filled out a few different surveys. First one was to actually evaluate cognitive test anxiety and emotional dysregulation. They also filled out a demographics form and a self-reported GPA. Now, cognitive test anxiety in this study showed no influence on the self-reported GPA, except for the strategy subscale, which was predictive of self-reported GPA. The authors took this to mean that perhaps poor strategizing or poor coping skills could have affected the GPA. Emotional dysregulation, though, was positively correlated to test anxiety. So again, we go back to that same point about how those negative emotions have been found to predict test anxiety. For this last study, which is coping with negative emotions, connections with adolescents' academic performance and stress, we had 119 undergraduate high school students, from which their parents had to give authorizations. They were given surveys to evaluate their moods and their perceptions of these moods and whether or not they thought they affected their grades. The students with higher GPAs, like those that were doing better, experienced less academic stress and therefore less disengaged coping mechanisms. And academic stress or test anxiety showed a pretty strong relation to negative academic performance. So they are all just showing that they're strongly correlated to each other. Now, whether test anxiety and disengaged emotional tools and coping mechanisms could affect grades, I think the answer is yes. It has been found to negatively affect grades, and emotional dysregulation and disengaged coping mechanisms have been found to be predictive of test anxiety. For the last study, the authors, for many of the studies, for 2 of the studies, but for the last study, the authors suggest that improving these emotional tools and coping mechanisms could be the key in fighting test anxiety because they have been found to be so predictive of it that perhaps if they were combated, that test anxiety would decrease and that academic performance would therefore get better. So, yeah, thank you for listening.